You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Have you ever wondered if there's anything larger than yourself, or perhaps larger than our planet, or perhaps larger than our solar system, or perhaps larger than our galaxy? Man, wow. Or have you ever wondered what it's like to be immortal? Well, if you have asked those questions, then you have found the right podcast. Welcome to Systematic Ecology. Today, we are talking about the big MCU next phase 4 movie, The Eternals. So we'll just share with you that if you haven't seen the movie, there will be spoilers. Pause this podcast right this moment, go watch the movie, then come back and then join us in this conversation. I am Will Rose. I'm a Lutheran pastor in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and really stoked to be a part of Systematic Ecology and all the conversations that we're having. And one thing that I'm kind of geeking out about or bringing me joy is that today I got my booster for the vaccine. So I am boosted up, and, you know, who knows? I may turn into a superhero later on or the Hulk. We'll see what happens.
I am Joe. I am a marketer and broadcaster. And right now I am geeking out on Star Trek: The Next Generation. We're about halfway through the series, and so far, so good.
Awesome. Good sci-fi, kind of the OG sci-fi, right? That's kind of how it all started. Cool. Well, we're here to talk about the movie Eternals. And before we get into rankings or what we thought about the movie itself, you know, Marvel has had a decade of setting up these different phases of this grand universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we're now into a new phase with a few movies that have come out over the summer and this fall. And now The Eternals has been hyped as the big next phase in the MCU. And so we're going to give our hot takes and our lukewarm takes and our rankings and what we think about and the questions that it raises for us in terms of big theological and philosophical questions. But before we get into that, Joe and I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of our history of the Eternals. You know, we all have our history of superheroes, whether we picked up a Superman comic or a Spider-Man comic. The Eternals is a little bit more obscure. So, Joe, what is your history with this group of characters that made it to big screen?
So some of my first comics that I was introduced to were found in boxes at estate sales that I would go to my father with, and that we would basically clear them out and things like that. And so my background is kind of all over the place, early days sort of thing. And I remember seeing some of these comics with these characters that were drawn to be metaphorically and and literally larger than life. And so I kind of had I'm not sure if it was a pleasure or if it was a problem, but regardless, I had some experience with these characters and understanding what these characters were and what they weren't prior to them joining the MCU toy box.
Yeah. I'm there with you. I grew up on Marvel Comics, X-Men. Uncanny X-Men was my geek of choice when I was a kid and into the teenage years. And then when I got back into comics in the early 2000s, I dove right into just anything, whether it was DC, Vertigo, Independent, Marvel. I was just amazed at this genre of storytelling, of the serialized storytelling, the graphic novel, the art, the word balloons, just love it all. So I definitely knew of Jack Kirby and his stamp in the Marvel universe and his kind of place on Mount Rushmore as the kind of founding father of modern and postmodern comics, and even some of his drama he had with Stan Lee. I didn't really know his history of being at Marvel, then went to DC, and then back to Marvel. So I had to do some background and read a book on that and did a little deep diving. And some of the story of Jack Kirby is that, he created these big characters we know like Iron Man, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, but then was disillusioned with Marvel, felt like he was getting shortchanged on the creative end of things financially. So he went to DC, created the New Gods, and created this whole new big wing of DC characters that we see in their movies today, right? But then he came back to Marvel, and Marvel saw that what he did with the New Gods, and said, "We want you to do that similar thing with us." So out of that is what birthed the Eternals. He tried to recreate New Gods and Darkseid and this big kind of intricate sci-fi mythology, and so that's what birthed the Eternals. I wasn't that familiar with the Eternals. I knew Neil Gaiman rebooted them a few years back, and read a little bit of that, but not too deeply. And then when I knew this movie was coming up into Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I read some original trades with Jack Kirby's run on the Eternals from the very beginning, and then some of Neil Gaiman's work with the Eternal too. So it's still, I will confess that there are a lot of characters and there's a lot of depth there, or complicated family trees and mythologies that are built upon that. So I still have to be reminded of who's who and what's their power and what's their place. It's a little convoluted for me, but that was what I tried to do some research before going into the movie.
Yeah, this is one of those areas of comics where it's this combination of deep and involved and rich and incomplete and not really fully flushed out. So it's kind of a hard place to play in when you're talking about creating something to fit into this already established mythology, especially taking it from the point of view of trying to shove as many of that pantheon of characters into one single spot at one single time,
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Like this kind of pantheon of characters being brought into this next phase. It was a big reach. It was pretty ambitious, and I admire what they're trying to do with this. We'll talk about here in a moment whether we thought it hit the right marks or not, but I definitely was an ambitious movie with these characters to try to pull in. Marvel has this history. Not only do they lift up the main characters, as you said, in their toy box, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Captain America, Thor, but they have these other kind of B-list, C-list characters, and they have a good track record of pulling in kind of the C-listers and putting them in the limelight and helping us care about them, whether it's Groot or Rocket Raccoon or Star-Lord. When they first announced Guardians of the Galaxy, I was like, what? They're going to do that? Okay, that's how they're going to expand. And my same reaction was with the Eternals. Guardians of the Galaxy hit a little bit more at home for me than this one, but yeah, good effort. And so let's talk about the movie. What did you think? What stood out for you? What kind of rankings or grade do you give it?
So I thought it was a very pretty movie. Let's start there. I think visually speaking, I thought they did a very good job keeping it visually compelling.
Absolutely.
And I have to agree that this is a movie that, this one's for you, Dan. This is a movie that really tried to leave behind the Marvel formula. And there absolutely is a Marvel formula, good, bad, or indifferent. A lot of them are very samey in a lot of ways, and it's made them remarkable success. But this is a movie that not only did they try to cram a whole lot into a very small space, but they tried to do so in a way that, to a certain degree, subverted some of the expectation that people would have going into a Marvel movie. So I can understand it myself. I thought it was, like I said, pretty. You know what I mean? I thought it was ambitious. I thought they tried to do a lot. I thought the pacing was all over the place. I thought they tried a little too hard at being highbrow. I think that it's, don't get me wrong, I love, we're going to get into some of the philosophical and theological implications of some of the questions that were raised by this movie. And those are the kinds of things I love about being a geek, being able to discuss and cut it up about what these questions are and what these concepts are and different things like that, because they're weighty. But when you try too hard to make that the sole objective behind where you're trying to go with the whole piece, then you are catering to a very small part of the audience. It's all the same as if they were to go through and make it, as comic book accurate as possible, and a whole bunch of, Easter eggs that only seasoned comic book fans would know, and all of that. You're secluding a big part of the audience when you do that. And so what I think they were trying to do ended up being translated in a lot of respects as slow, convoluted, and just honestly, a lot of the same critiques that I have heard people make about DC movies. Wow. This very much felt like a DC Marvel movie in a lot of respects.
Hey, I can't believe they got away with it, but they even name dropped Superman literally in the movie. Yeah. One of the kid was like, "Hey, it's Superman. You shoot lasers and you fly around with a cape." And he was like, "I don't have a cape." But yeah, I was like, "Wow, okay," making a dig. Or, and 10 characters is a lot. Like, yeah, it is ambitious with its it started with in the beginning ... and then scrolled almost like a Star Wars scroll of this grand narrative or mythology of creation. So it's inviting. I mean, this movie was created for systematic geekology, for us to geek out over and talk about and dissect and deconstruct. But then it leaned into, you can emote 10 Eternals that have the same powers as the Justice League. And then even tip your hat that one of the characters is very similar to Superman, just to let people know that you're self-aware of those things. I get it. For me, I'm there with you. I thought, it set up some big questions. I loved the big, grand universe building aspect of it. I love the idea of the Celestials and what's behind the fabric of the universe and where did it come from and where it's going. That stuff just pulled me in. I just wanted more of that. For each, the individual of the Eternals, I guess I didn't have a history with them. They tried to set up their backstories and history along the way, which, as you said, the pacing, a little convoluted. I didn't care about them as much. So when one of them died, I was like, I don't care. I mean, of course I care when somebody dies. But I wasn't like invested into this character enough to be like really pulled on the heartstrings. I was like, okay, yeah, I guess some die, some live, they're immortal, something's going on. I guess the main characters weren't that attractive. They fell a little flat for me. But the grand universe that the MCU is building in terms of Phase 4, that's the stuff that I cared about the most. And that's partly speaks probably to my palate more when it comes to theology and philosophy anyway. But man, when they pulled back the curtain on what was going on in the larger galaxy or the universe, I was like, yeah, more of this. When he came back to Earth to find out about the Eternals, I was like, okay, what's next? We're working through that formula.
Yeah, I think that with something like this, it's wonderful to see the narrative yarn weaving and setting up all of the history of this universe that we've already come to care about. The problem becomes when you try to start there, when that is its own story. That there's enough meat on the bone that you could just do that. And progressively through this story, that gravitas, I guess, that they had built up, this anticipation, just kind of felt flat because you took the watcher out of that and into a story piece about characters that were not developed. It's interesting that you bring up the death. That for me, I knew that actor from a different movie, and he was the fan favorite, likable guy in that movie. He dies in both movies. But I cared more because I had just recently saw him in something else. I did not care about his character. So him dying was like, oh, okay. I just met you. So sorry, but I don't overly care. You know what I mean? There's
Right.
no weight behind it. And when you're talking about the depiction of the gods of the universe, then there should be weight behind what happens. When you're talking about the cosmic aspect of the Marvel universe, there should be huge implications behind that. That's why I came out of this saying that would have been, if you'd have cut off half of that movie, made that a movie, and then put the rest on Disney Plus in some kind of miniseries or something along those lines, that would have been much better. Most people have pretty sophisticated home watching environments nowadays. And with all of the streaming platforms thirsty for content, come on. Like, to me, it felt like the same kind of critique that could be given to most of the other MCU movies that kind of fell flat. It was more than one movie shoved into, like, spliced together into one Frankenstein piece. You know what I mean?
Which is similar to like the DC movies that critique with that. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Like, I think you can get creative. We definitely have the streaming services that are hot right now that have the episodic. Star Wars has leaned into that. And then you have the movies that were trying to get people post-pandemic back into the theaters. And this is happening. It made a lot of money, and they may make more of the Eternals. It said the Eternals will return. But maybe the next step in evolution, since evolution and progress is a part of this movie, a big theme, even show Charles Darwin's face and framed up on the wall, is maybe the evolution is you do some episodes or streaming services episodes that then lead to the big movie, or have a big movie that introduce these things and then lead into episodes like they did with the Winter Soldier and the Falcon and Loki and those kinds of things. I think Star Wars hopefully will do that too. They have all these episodes coming to Disney Plus, and then hopefully maybe there'll be some grand intersectionality where it becomes one big movie to draw it all together. So I hope they get creative and think outside the box with those things. It's funny, you talked about the Marvel formula. We've seen so many of that played out, so much of that played out. People are claiming for, like, oh, let's do something different. I want to see something different. Well, this movie tried to do something different, and people are like, wait, where's the formula? I'm not connecting. Right. So we go back and forth. Us fans tend to do that. Even in Star Wars, like, we want to see some things different. Why do you do the same thing over again? Do things a little different. Wait a minute, why are you doing things different? So we sometimes can get a little two-faced or hypocritical when it comes to those things of what we're clamoring for.
I always tell people that are particularly upset about a comic, a decision made in a comic arc that, really changes things and stuff like that. Wait a couple of years. Nobody stays dead in comics. There's been 2 people in the entirety of comics that have stayed dead, and they haven't really, there's been what if things and different side stories and stuff like that where they've been written back into existence. Mm-hmm. Nothing stays permanent in comics. So it's the same deal with the source material, right? You have people that will talk about how Superman has been this way forever, how this character has been this way forever. We want something new. We want something different. And when that is introduced, now, granted, a lot of the current stuff falls into the category of, they're introducing new stuff, but without a lick of proper storytelling. They're just changing things to change things up and to, push agendas and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, I mean, there is some backlash that's happening with this that proves that people will argue over a stick. Like, people will argue and freak out over the dumbest things. Like, guys, you're getting ugly over a movie. Let's just keep this grounded in what it is. It's a movie based off of a comic book. So even for somebody like me that didn't necessarily thoroughly enjoy it, I can see that this was something that they just tried to go off what they established as the status quo. And I think that knowing the comic book, the source roots of the MCU and what that looks like in comic book form, I thought they were brilliant. That is a storyline that really does start off more grounded. And as that saga goes on, that's when you start to see, even more so in the comics than how they ended up playing it out in movie form, the celestial side, the god side of it start to come out, and it boils down to cosmic figures and this and that. So that was a smart track that they went on. So when you have this new direction that people, I think this is also suffering from people being a little unsettled, because we are now in a post Endgame, post this first section of the story being told era, where if there's any missteps, they're slipping, it's this, it's that, it's all of a sudden super bad because so and so is doing this or whatever. I think it is suffering a bit from that, but you have to go someplace. And if you wind back the clock a bit, one of the biggest gripes that I have heard from people when it comes to the MCU is that it is very much a contained story on these characters. We want to know what happens beyond these things. We want to know more things like Thanos. We want to know what the gods are, these different things. And that is what this movie gave to you. Might not have been necessarily super well done, because I don't think it was, but for better or for worse, this ripped the Band-Aid off on the cosmic side of the MCU. And that's why I say that I wish that they gave us something bombastic in the beginning of this, like a movie that's really trimmed down and things like that. Then have your character beats, have this giant, I will go as far as to say bloated cast of characters, be able to work within an episodic environment where you can take time to tell their stories, and then have that either bleed into another one of the major movies where you can see these characters that you're spending all of this money to get on the big screen again, either in their own movie or playing with other characters that are in the toy box. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things, because they tried. It's the same. I would say that this felt the same. They fell to a similar problem as the DCEU. They tried to take all of this stuff and cram it down into one condensed thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a little friendly ribbing from across the aisle. Clearly, whoever shot, I don't have his name right in front of me, but whoever laid out this movie was a giant Zack Snyder fan, because they literally did the Superman shot, the super zoom in and to signify when Superman was throwing a punch. They literally took that shot for this movie. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. And, there is this balance. Like I'm there for the movie. I came to this movie not with a lot of baggage, because I didn't know these characters very well. So I'm like, hey, teach me. I'm ready to soak up something new. I've done a little bit of reading the graphic novels, and a little bit about Jack Kirby, and that's its place in the Marvel universe back in the late 70s. But I'm here to soak it up. I don't know much about this. I don't have a lot of care for this. So I was there for the story, but there is, in a sense, I'm also for that balance of, I'm there for the end. I'm ready for the end credit scene to show me what the next step is. What's the teaser for the next movie? What's the hype to these end credit scenes? So it's almost like I'm there for the movie, really not for the movie, but for the end credit scene what's going to happen next. And I thought the end credit scenes didn't disappoint at all. But I try to remind myself and be balanced. I'm here for the whole story, not just what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? There's a sense of, again, in our own personal lives and our own spirituality, a sense of being in the moment, being in the present, but also looking to the future, also having goals for the future. Yeah, having an eternity, an eternal destination awaiting for me, but what about the now and what's happening in the story at the moment? How does the plot thicken now with me and my purpose there. So I have to remind myself when I go to these movies, the same thing happens in my own life. But yeah, there's end credit scenes of expanding Thanos' family, and also this other character that I didn't know a whole lot about. Man, I know a lot about comics. I know a lot about Marvel, but I don't know much about the Black Knight. And this was teased throughout the movie. And then at the end credit scene, here's another character, whether it's Shang-Chi or others who can be part of this new wave of adventures or new heroes in the Marvel Universe. Here's another obscure character, somewhat obscure, that's being brought into the limelight that I'm looking forward to seeing how his place is going to be here in the big picture. You know, is he going to get his own movie or be brought in to a TV show or another team up? I don't know.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, Marvel is built off of a series of super obscure teams in a lot of respects. And that is fortified with your tentpole characters. You know what I mean? But
Right.
So much of Marvel's history is in these, you know, random pairings of superheroes. A lot of times they were superheroes that couldn't sell their own book. And so they got lumped together in a lot of respects. And so that's something, like you had said before, that is a trend that the MCU does very, very well. And it becomes problematic to me when you're more focused mentally on the end credit. Now, granted, I personally am not a big fan of what Marvel did to the cinematic world, A, with their formula, but B, with the end credit thing. I think it destroyed cinema in a lot of regards, because it becomes so tempting to sit there and be like, well, what are they going to set up? Where's the story going? What's the big bump? Because that's when the juicy stuff is going to take place.
Right.
If your audience is more focused on that, then you have failed on some level as a storyteller. And that's what I very much think happened. But at the same token, the other layer of failure there is that I left this wanting to see the Black Knight, not giving a crap about the rest of the characters. I don't care if I ever see the rest of these characters in another in another movie. Right. I do care if I see Dane Whitman in a future MCU movie. And that's the same deal. Like, Iron Man was a super obscure C-list character when Robert Downey Jr. picked him up, to the point where nobody noticed. But if you watch the progression of comics, Tony Stark in the comics suddenly becomes more and more Robert Downey Jr. like in appearance to mimic the movies and all of that kind of stuff. Like, Shang-Chi is another one, super beloved movie. Really, really, like, the fan base really reacted to that one. Name me one person who, like, I know about Shang-Chi's character outside of this. Come on. Like, two people might raise their hand. You know what I mean? And it's the same deal with this. You can take more liberties with these characters as long as you aren't so totally egregious that you really push away the fans of the source material. As long as you give some credit there, then the world is your oyster in a lot of regards, as long as you tell a good story. So if you notice, there's a difference between this character that is in, like, what, a third of the movie. I think I'm being generous. Total screen time. You walk out wanting more of this character, and these other characters that took up most of this movie, they still had a lot of that. You had a lot of that same freedom to be able to tell a brand new story with them, but it just wasn't compellingly done. So I don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'll disagree with you a little bit about the end credit scene. I think, I do see other movies trying to copy that, and they probably shouldn't. But the reason I read comics is, man, that serialized. I go get my stack of comics on Wednesday, and man, that comic has to have that final page to really tease me to want to see what happens in that. So I chase that feeling of the last page teaser of the shock of the character returning or a villain showing up or something happen to make me want to see what the next story is going to be. So I think within the comic book movies, that fits 100% because I want a final page or a teaser to say what's going to happen next. And then, Dune didn't have a closing. So people are asking, is there going to be an end credit scene? And they're like, no, it's just the credits. There's no teaser of what happened. Even though they'll make another one, that I think it fought that temptation of having an end credit scene. Like, look, we're not a comic book. We're its own thing. Here are the list of people. And it's taught us to sit in our seats, to read all the people who put all the hard work into these movies. So I'll still watch even if there's no end credit scene, I'll still watch the credits just to, props to the people who helped create this piece of art. But you're right. There has to be that balance. I think it fits within the comic book movies just because, man, that's what comic books are known of, that every Wednesday or every month, there's something that brings us to the next one. Well, let's transition a little bit and talk about the philosophical and theological aspect of the movie. In a former episode, we talked a little bit of kind of sci-fi at its best. It draws out questions that haunt human beings in terms of where our place is in the universe. And this definitely had that. I mean, it started with a biblical phrase that kicked off really everything in the beginning, right. ... And then it filled its own blank, its own story. But what was the main question of this movie that it was trying to ask us? What, on your point of view, what was the thrust or the question that it was challenging its audience to ask and wrestle with in this movie?
As humans, where do we fit? As humans, what's our purpose? You know what I mean? Sometimes it can feel like there's so many things going on outside of just humanity. And in regards, there are things going on outside of humanity that where do humans fit in all of this? And so I loved that aspect of this movie, the questions that it posed, because it's easy to get lost, even as Christians. It's easy to get lost in the weeds when it comes to all of this and not have a healthy perspective on what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to what are the implications of being human, and what are the implications of having a relationship with the Savior? You know what I mean? That's something that is its own topic. You know what I mean? These implications of when you recognize that there are celestial figures at play here, things that are divine at play here. What does that mean? And there's a whole lot of people that have a whole lot of different perspectives on what it means to be human and where we fit and what is due us as humans and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree. The main question definitely, what does it mean to be human? What's our place in the universe? And then it tried to go down the road of the problem of pain and evil and suffering. This evolutionary arc that humans are in terms of progression, and we are part of an evolving universe. And where do we fit in this evolving universe? Is it just by chance? Is it with a purpose? Is it with some divine intelligence behind it, pulling us along, guiding us along the way? And so I do like how the Eternals themselves wrestled with that question on their own, whether it was Sprite, who was forever young. Who wouldn't want to always be young, always be immortal, live forever, wrestling with immortality. Is mortality a part of the human nature that draws us, that makes life even more precious? Or if we were immortal and live forever, will we get tired and bored of what's going on in the world? Is asking these questions. A show that I'm a fan of, I know not everybody is, but The Good Place, man, it played around with this idea, philosophical question of what it means to be human, and what does it mean to live forever or not? What is death's place in the universe? And I thought it lifted these questions, these big moral, philosophical, almost the trolley problem question to the forefront of what would we do? Who are we? And our place in the universe. So yeah.
I think that there are a couple of pit stops that are nigh inevitable when you try and start talking about the kinds of things that this tried to talk about, including something cataclysmic, like the snap. You know what I mean? And now you're seeing that there are divine beings in play, celestial bodies at play when this huge thing happened and so much life was lost. And then you have to start asking the kinds of questions of, okay, if that exists, then how come that happened? That's one of my favorite questions to get posed with. I love, as in missions, I love when people approach me about the problem of evil, and I think it's one that Christians have done a very good job at overcomplicating over time. It boils down to two things. It boils down to free will and hope. Because the second that you start talking about problems in the world and sin and all of those kinds of things, that's the second that I get to start talking about the hope of Jesus Christ. And I mean the hope, you know what I mean? Because that's what we have, is hope. To get into that theological part of it, that's what we have. You know what I mean? That's what makes the problem of evil, I'm going to say okay, palatable, acceptable. I don't know. Whatever word you want to put in there. But and it's interesting to me. I got some really. You brought up Sprite. I thought it introduced some very interesting quandaries, especially for somebody like me. A very small piece of my backstory: I'm a former transhumanist. I very much was the type of person, before I got saved, I thought technological and biological integration was the key to immortality. And for somebody with a death phobia, the key to immortality is very, very, very tempting. Trying to find that and getting lost in that is very, very tempting. So it wrestles with these questions of, what does it mean to be forever young? What does it mean to live forever? What does that What are the implications of being somebody who, A, can never change certain aspects of themselves, but at the same token watches generations come and go over full cycles and different things like that? And there are some people that are like, okay, I'll make new friends. I'll start a new life. I'll figure it out. And there are other people like, nope, that actually sounds like hell. You know what I mean? So, I that's, again, it's its own topic of conversation. But, when you're talking about these philosophical things, I think a lot of these things end up, if you're really diving into the nuts and bolts of these kinds of conversations, you almost need to take multiple pieces of these different things. So I can see how, just by nature of what it is that you're talking about, you end up with this whole buffet table's worth of really significant questions and really good questions to ask, but you almost have so much that it's an impossibility to be able to do justice to any one of these topics, at least in that kind of format.
Yeah, and I appreciated that the Eternals themselves, the characters, had different responses to different things. So, yeah, there were 10 of them. That was overwhelming at times, but they each had a response of how they respond to humanity, or their place, or being stuck on Earth waiting for their call to go back home. They respond in different ways, whether it was to create a movie genre or have a family or start to become a professor or whatever that may be. They had their ways to respond, and we can find ourselves in those things. I talk about transhumanism. There is a friend of mine who oversees the Christian transhumanism club, to where he talks about integrating, kind of similar to faith and science. How do we integrate technology, machines with humans and our faith? So yeah, those are big questions. Those are the big sci-fi questions. There's big philosophical questions, bioethics, ethics that are part of this, that I think continue to push and challenge us. That is great. And as we ask the question of, what does it mean to be human? And then what is our place in the universe? Is there a moral arc to the universe, a purpose to the universe? The next big question is, okay, is there a God? What is God's nature? What is God's character? And then, who do we believe God to be that's behind all this? And so I think this asks it too. And as you were talking about a little bit, this movie started with the phrase "in the beginning," ... and created its own kind of creation myth and creation story. We have scripture, the Bible, that starts in the beginning, and really the point of Genesis isn't necessarily to lay out all the mysteries of the universe or a science textbook that you place in somebody's lap to learn all things science, but really what the Hebrews were trying to do is to create this counter narrative that humans aren't a mistake, that humans aren't a byproduct of a war between the gods. There were all these creation myths surrounding the Hebrews, from humans were born out of the blood of defeated gods, right? Or that they're a nemesis, a mistake, that they are just a piece of mold on a piece of bread who are devouring it forever. Hebrews were like, no, Yahweh, God, created us out of love, created us out of goodness, that God even says it is good. God refused to be God apart from us. I want to be in relationship with you. So really behind the backdrop of Genesis is this understanding of not only the understanding of humans are, but who they understand God to be as well, and the nature and character of God. So I think that's something we can lift up as Christians and people of faith to say, all right, here at the beginning, who do we understand God to be, and who are we in relationship to the God who created us out of love and called us good from the very beginning?
I'll tell you, and this is actually a whole thought process that actually led me to the perspective that transhumanism and Christianity are diametrically opposed. It breaks my heart to say that, but it is one thing to say, I love God, I respect God, I fear God, I have reverence for God. There's a lot of things that you can say about how we, as the creation, feel about God, the creator. But let's talk for a second about how the creator feels about his creation. We have significance, worldly speaking, within this universe because we are created. Because of the creator. Through the creator is where we find our significance. And that's hard for some people when you realize that it is how do I say this? Josh, I did this out. You have to remind him sometimes. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I'm just kidding, Josh. You have these, it matters how you interact with this world, how you interact with people, how God treats people too, how God cares for people, how God thinks about people. That should influence us in the way that we interact with people. And so to understand that, I lived a whole bunch of time doing the Christian thing, the Christianese thing of being, knowing all of the words to the songs and when to raise my hand and all of those kinds of things. You get paper theology at that point. And that's all it was. And then I realized it and I was like, never mind this. And I split and I went off to live for myself. And that's exactly what I did. And then I fell hard and came back to the cross and realized, wait a minute. This whole gospel thing that I've heard 1,000,000 times before, this gospel story is true. And the God who created us loves us, cares for us, has invested interest in what we do and how we act and all of those kinds of things. Dude, that is paradigm shifting. That is enough to break your reality in the best possible way. So these implications, and even down to you have somebody like Paul who says in what some consider to be a throwaway line. I know that's hard to say about something in the Bible, but something that's mentioned and then moved away from, that we have the mind of Christ. That we are indwelt, that that relationship that we have with God bears impact on us as well. Yeah. So when you discuss what it means to be human, that has to come from a place of understanding that we aren't just byproducts of a disgruntled accident amongst higher beings than us, like a lot of other belief systems believe. That
right, we're
we
not
were
caught between this duality of war between God and Satan, or the celestials and the eternals. We're not caught between this cosmic war. We're rather created with a purpose and with intrinsic value. And that is paradigm shifting, how we treat our neighbor, how we love ourselves, and how we love others. I agree. I'll push back with a little bit on the Christian transhumanism. I think you're right. When we start moving down the road of the Tower of Babel, trying to do things on our own, or scientism that says science is the end all, and that's our quest for immortality without integrating God or faith into that, then I think that's a problem. That's where people of faith and Christians can bring a different side to the story. But in terms of like technology and the gift of technology, I think there's a way as Christians we can talk about that too. For instance, like you with glasses on your head, like you have a certain part of technology that's a part of who you are that helps you augment your life. My dad has a pacemaker, so he has a machine that's keeping his heart moving. There are people I know. I'm diabetic. I don't have a pump yet, but I know friends who have pumps they have merged with kind of science and technology talk and discussion about vaccines, those kinds of things that Christians can talk about that aspect as an aspect of faith and as gifts from the divine to help us live quality of lives and take care of our neighbors. So I definitely hear what you're saying on one side, but then also not to abandon all of it, because there's room for the other side to talk some about technology, science, good stewardship, in terms of God saying, I'm entrusting you with creation. Go back to the beginning of Genesis. Here, be good stewards, be fruitful and multiply. Take care of what I've given you, this gift of creation. And I think even technology, science, medicine can be a part of that good stewardship of a higher calling of how that can integrate with our faith and how we see God.
So to push back a little bit,
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. I'm the type of person that, trust me, you're not going to catch me sleeping on science. I think it's insane to me how many Christians so totally just ignore science because if it's not just what I heard in Sunday school, then it doesn't matter. No. There are multiple forms of evolution, and some of them have, wait for it, been proven scientifically true. I know, crazy.
Amen. I'm with you, brother.
So there are a lot of places where science and, science in and of itself is the understanding of how our world works.
Right.
That doesn't disqualify God, because God's the one that made the universe that we are studying. God blessed us with science and abilities to be able to understand the world around us and to be able to avoid things like, you talked about the booster shot. I don't care. I understand it's unpopular. I don't care. But people also were dying of polio a whole while back. You know what I mean? Like we've been able to have these tools to be able to overcome things that would have otherwise killed off humanity. We have been able to do things like man seeing the stars because of things like science, to be able to understand and corroborate the Bible, because that was the whole thing, right? I got saved, and then a whole year of, okay, I need to understand and believe the context in which this promise, in which the claims of this book lie. And this book claims to be a lot of things. Now let's go through the process of proving it. And I went through beat for beat. And I believe that with that, before you even get to the Bible, there's enough scientific proof to prove the empty tomb. So, like I said, science and faith, 100%. Like, to me, science fortifies my faith and makes me be able to be out in nature and be out in creation and say, God, you created all of this, and yet you still understand who I am better than I understand me. I will never get that fully, but praise God for it. There comes a point, though, where you cross, to me, it becomes a game of morality at a certain point. Who gets to play God? Who gets to use these implementations to artificially sustain life in a way outside of a vaccine or glasses or aids to things to help better the life that a person is leading? And from my perspective, and this is its own moral question, but I personally do not believe that humans are capable of holding that gun without misfiring it, because it will inevitably come down to pride. It will inevitably come down to a class system. Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? You would have to go to Star Trek levels of uniformity in accepting advancement over stuff in order for that to actually play out. And to me, and from what I've seen, humans just aren't capable of that. I think we want to believe we are, and I think we have high hopes for that. And I think but I think that once you take it out of the theoretical and put it into the practical, that 100% falls apart.
Joe, I love your passion. So good. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're more on the same page than we both think. I mean, I think I'm with you. I think that it plays out in the movie when dropping the atomic bomb, that gun. Are we able to hold it? Yeah. Atomic energy splitting the atom was meant by a scientist for good, for a new way of harnessing energy for the human race. But then we turned it into a weapon. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's what Christians and people of faith can bring to the table when it comes to science and playing God or wherever they may be, that we have a voice to talk about morality and value, where science just want to see how far we can push or what we're capable of. I think philosophy, theology can come to the table and say, wait, let's attach some values and morality to these things too. Yeah. So yeah, good discussion. I think it all fits when it comes to Eternals in this movie, because I think that's what it was trying to ask too, especially when it shows a picture of Darwin and talk about evolution and where are humans progressing to. Is the reason that it's so quiet out there in the universe, we haven't been contacted by aliens yet, is that we're not smart enough yet or haven't reached a higher level of consciousness? I don't know, but that's good for sci-fi, good questions. But I do think as people of faith who believe in a God of love and grace that has infused us with value, that we have a voice at the table as well when it comes to those things. You mentioned Paul, so I want to bring in the Bible verse of the day, and this is 1 Corinthians 13, chapter 13, verse 12. And yeah, I know 1 Corinthians 13 read at a lot of weddings, but I don't think Paul meant it to be a poem being read at weddings all the time. But he's really trying to tap into this mystery of the universe, and so it reads, "For now, what we see in a mirror dimly, we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love." And I think that's what the movie was trying to say at some point. Purpose is love, but then this mystery of like, yeah, we don't see everything that's going on in the universe, but we do know somebody who does know what's going on in the universe and holds us in the palm of God's hand, and a palm rooted in love. And so I think that's where we're at, and that's where we're going. Joe, any final thoughts or words when it comes to the scripture or the movie or the big questions?
Yeah, it's funny that you had mentioned the bit about weddings, because my wife and I, the pastor who married us, actually wanted to read that, and I vetoed it because it just to me, it does not, from everything that I know about the writing, it's not meant for weddings. It says more about humans' place in the world than it does about how to treat your partner or how to perform in a marriage or anything like that.
Right. And so, no judgment on those who chose it to be their wedding, but I think sometimes it gets just reduced to that one day in people's lives, and it has a cool thing to go back and read chapter 13, 1 Corinthians 13, and replace the word love with God, since in 1 John it talks about God is love. Replace the word love with God and read it through, and you can see the full nature of who God is. It's a pretty fun exercise to read that in a different way. Pretty fun to do.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's do some plugs. Oh, yes. Great discussion. Joe, appreciate what you bring to the table and to this podcast. And yeah, we invite our listeners to go to systematicecology.org, I believe. It's .org, .com. I think it's .org. .org. And so you can find the host there. You can ask questions. You can engage. We invite you to go to our Patreon page and support us there to get extra content, support this. And if there are any topics or questions that we're not hitting, or if we spark something new or something else you disagree with us with, we'd love to hear from you and can't wait to hear what you have to say and things that we can do in the future. Yeah, anything else there, Joe, I'm forgetting in terms of plugging systematic ecology?
Yeah, no, so many of these conversations can only go so far during this format. So seriously, we have the Facebook group, we have the Facebook page, we have the website, we have these different means to engage and to continue on the conversation. And that's kind of the goal here. You know, we have this conversation and it's to stimulate further conversation, because as you're having that conversation, you're thinking through these things. You're looking past just the geekiness of it all into the larger implications. So, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, if there's something that you hear that you want to engage further with, hit us up. That's what those platforms are there for.
100%. Yeah. So a couple things I do want to share with the group recommendations. There is a book about Jack Kirby. I know I've plugged in other places too, but if you're interested in his kind of legacy when it comes to comics and graphic novels, there's a graphic novel about his life called Jack Kirby: The Epic Life of the King of Comics. Tom Scioli, I think, Scioli. Great graphic novel that talks about his life. So I recommend go read that book, especially in light of Jack Kirby's original creations coming to the big screen.
Yeah. Likewise, I would like to recommend a documentary that DC put up on their YouTube channel last year. During the height of everything, they put out every week. They were putting out a different short style documentary. It's like 45 minutes in length, but they do one on Jack Kirby and the impact that he had on DC. So it's nice to see from more than just the Marvel side what he contributed to the comic book universe.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening, y'all. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're geeking out on, and remember, we are priests to the geeks. All right. Peace.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.